So welcome to a short video on how to plan your homework. So I've written out the task here. You don't have to write it out if you don't want to. And like all non-fiction tasks, it comes with a quotation at the beginning. And that quotation is just to get you thinking. It's not that you have to agree with it. It's actually just to give you some pointers so that you've got things to write about. So if we read the quotation, it says, "Some women are using feminism to terrorise men. Women already have equal rights. The Me Too campaign has gone too far." Now there's sort of three separate issues in there. You don't have to talk about all of them. But it then asks you to write an article for a broadsheet newspaper giving your opinions on the subject of feminism. Could add that. So how do you approach writing this? Well, first thing you need to do is have a look at the resources that are available to you. Research will really help your response, and that's part of the homework, is that you watch the video, which is a short one by the Washington Post, which explains the Me Too campaign. You have a look at some of the news articles, and there's even an article from the Times that I've put up there about a recent example of feminist policy in the workplace and how it's changing our lives. Once you've had a look at these, that will help you answer this question and establish what your views are. And some of you may have read more about this than others. So my first port of call to you would be, have a look at the resources available and do some research. Then you need to have a think about planning your response. So when you plan a non-fiction piece, I always advise to begin with your own view, because that has to be the same all the way through the piece, and it can be as simple or as complicated as you like. You could say feminism and Me Too are hurting society. You could say they are a short movement, or you could argue that they are helping us become better people and changing the way that we live and interact. So I might begin with, my view is equal rights are important. I think that the Me Too campaign perhaps started well, but it has had some mixed results as people have tried to apply the ideas of equality in different ways in different places, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it's made things quite messy. Okay, so if I take that view, then I need to think about my opening. Now, if you've read the text and some excellent quotations, I would actually, as I read, note down the things I think are interesting or that I could comment on. I don't necessarily have to agree, but for example, Catherine Deneuve, who is from the article that says Me Too as a witch hunt, she wrote a letter to a French newspaper, began with this: "Rape is a crime, but persistent or clumsy flirting is not an offence, nor is gallantry a macho attack." If you're unsure of any of the words in here, it might well be worth looking them up. Clumsy flirting, I'm sure you'll find understanding. You know, some things that have been picked up are contact in the workplace, or people sending messages that the other recipient doesn't like. Gallantry is when you're gallant, you're behaving in a way that's perhaps chivalrous, old-fashioned, things like holding a door open for a woman, or letting her have the seat while you stand, for example. And a macho attack suggests that it's a sort of macho meaning male, perhaps aggressive, and making women feel that they need to be rescued. Okay, so she's saying gallantry isn't a macho attack, and the thrust of her argument was about women shouldn't be victims. If you're not sure about the language when you read these articles, you must look it up. That's part of the process of learning. Okay, so I might begin with a little bit of her quote, "Persistent or clumsy flirting is not an offence," and use that as an interesting opening to suggest I could take that in lots of directions. Flirting is not an offence. Pose the question, are people too easily offended? how much freedom should we have? And then I need to make it clear what my view is. And I'm going to link back to that quotation in my closing in some way. And then I need to think of a range of points. So I often advocate using the HEAF acronym. So how does this issue impact health, education, environment, family and finance, which could definitely still work. Me Too has been linked to issues around mental health, people who feel like they're being constantly pestered and it's affecting their mental health. Education, how do we teach men, women, boys, girls to behave in a way that's respectful? Environment, you could talk about how the workplace has changed. Family, how do we respond to these issues within the family? And finance, there's lots of issues around how you treat offenders, so people who've lost their job financially. Should they, let's say they've lost their job, should they get a big settlement? Should they be dismissed without severance pay? Of course, some of the issues revolve around whether people are actually guilty or not and how hard that is to prove. So you could use this to plan your points. What I might say is that you might not want to use all of these, or you might want to focus more narrowly on some of the issues. Okay, and some of the points, so you'll need to come up with probably 3 or 4 main points to make it to 400 to 500 words. So for example, you could begin with something like, it's good that everyone has the right to say no to someone's advances. That's true equality. For each of your points, you should be thinking about how you're going to develop the detail. And good ways are, apart from explaining your ideas, statistics might help, or a real life example. Okay. So, for example, in the first 24 hours after the Me Too campaign was launched on Twitter, 500,000 people retweeted with the hashtag #MeToo, acknowledging that they had suffered some kind of harassment in the workplace, or sexual harassment in the workplace. And that might be a good example to go with that everyone has the right to say no. It clearly is an issue. I need some more points. They need to be different as well. Some examples show that accusations ruin lives and may not be true or cannot be proved. Could you find an example of that? Or perhaps you could focus on relationships. How men and women behave in relationships has changed and must keep changing. And there is some discussion about this in the article from The Times that could proffer you some good examples of how this has changed through history, and how people are meeting each other, and why it makes it so hard to police that behaviour. So you don't have to do these points, but some suggestions. When you write your article, remember that you don't actually need to quote this quote. In fact, it's often clumsy when students do. So think of it more as a broadsheet newspaper. Broadsheet newspapers are more expensive. They have a higher reading age, so we're expecting to see complex vocabulary, and they still use rhetorical devices, so that is basically persuasive language. It depends on the topic as to how that comes across. And we're also expecting it to be formal in register, and probably importantly, you need that range of facts, opinions, quotations, because it's a newspaper article, and preferably also a link to some recent events to show why it's still current. Okay, so you don't have to refer to this quote explicitly saying it's wrong to say, quote, feminists terrorise men, because remember, this is just made up by the exam board to help you think. What you could do is say, one Me Too activist has said, and you could take a little bit of that quote, or perhaps research your own. In the exam course, you can always make them up, but of course the more you read about current issues and what's going on in the world, the easier you will find it to come up with convincing comments and opinions and views. It's up to you whether you type or handwrite this piece, but I would advise that you plan it first and use the resources and the reading.